everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and that right there is Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete.
Hello, Nikki. We're recording on a fine Memorial Day as we record this. So to all of our patrons who are hanging out, happy holiday. And I hope that you are taking some time to thank the veterans in your life and probably doing better things than showing up on the live stream. Go out and thank some veterans. You can always catch us later. We're going to be talking about talking to your family, talking to your loved ones after you've been diagnosed with ADHD. And I am super curious how this one cropped up for you. I feel like we've touched on it, but it's been a long time. That is the danger, I think, of a podcast that's 10 years old.
Well, it has been a long time. And This actually came from a listener, and it was his parents specifically that I think he was having some difficulty with. So, it's just a kind of a different twist on it.
Yeah, no, it's a good conversation to have and to keep having, because it doesn't get easier until you do it.
Right.
And so here we go. Before we dig into that, head over to takecontroladhd.com and get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website. You can subscribe to our mailing list, and we'll send you an email each time a new episode is released. And you can always connect with us on Facebook or Twitter at takecontroladhd. And we have a comment from a listener that we wanted to share.
Yes, and I think you need to read it because you are Casey Kasem.
Oh, geez. Here we go. Do you think anybody knows who Casey Kasem is anymore?
Who would? Oh, probably not. So who would be? Ryan Seacrest, right?
I don't know how I feel about that.
Well,
he's one hell of an entrepreneur.
Dick Clark.
Dick Clark's another one, though. How are you going to? I don't know.
Yeah, but Ryan Seacrest took over Dick Clark.
I'll go with Ryan Seacrest.
And then Rick Dees took over Casey Kasem.
Rick Dees?
Yeah, right?
I feel like that's another one that's like Rick Dees.
Really old.
Yes, it is. We've now passed 90s. Rick Dees.
I know.
Anyway,
I'm showing my age.
Here is the lovely comment that we have here from our fantastic listener. Here we go. Listening to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast for the past year has been a source of help and inspiration. For that, I wanted to thank you and share with you the way your podcast helped me. My story is no different than the hundreds you have already heard. Late diagnosis, ADHD type combined, last year at the age of 28, followed by medication, a hyperfocus on all that is ADD, and more ups than downs. Most of the time, I felt I would never be capable of doing the simplest tasks, would never be able to be an adult in a world where being an adult seemed to come naturally to everybody around me. In January, I was listening to the podcast while doing laundry when Jane Massengill talked about her bracelet that said, "Until now." I totally forget what I was doing. I'm not even sure I ended up completing it because these two words, so simple and yet so powerful. It was like a lightning bolt passing through my brain, but the good kind, you know? I love that. The good
I know.
Kind. That's a good qualifier. By the time I heard the podcast, I had already sold my house and quit my job and was preparing for a 5-month road trip through the U.S. and Canada with my girlfriend. Since then, until now, has been a mantra that has helped me get out of my anger, distraction, insecurity, and low self-esteem. It is now tattooed on my arm in Dutch. Not an impulsive decision, and every time I look at it, I cannot help but smile. So thank you again for reaching out and helping me, and I suspect many others in ways you may not even be aware of. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much for that message, and we'll call you Anonymous. I feel once again left behind that I have yet to get an ADHD-related tattoo.
Well, that's
it is inspirational.
Yeah, it is very much so. Well, and it's interesting because a group member of mine recently did get a bracelet engraved that says "Until Now" because it was also something that really resonated with her. So I want to say thank you to Jane for being such an inspiration. And, this person that wrote in, thank you for writing in and sharing your story. And to the group member who did the engraved bracelet, I think it's really important that when we find something like that really resonates and means something to us, that you remember it, however that is, whether that's a tattoo, a bracelet, a necklace, whatever, or even just a Post-it note on your computer, so that we don't forget.
If this show has ever touched you, if it has ever changed the way you live with your ADHD and you allow your ADHD to live with you, we sure hope you would consider supporting us at patreon.com/the ADHD Supporters there who have chosen to share with us their hard-earned cash each and every month pay for equipment, they pay for hosting, they pay for transmitting this podcast around the world, and they help us and inspire us to get up and do these shows every week over the last almost 10 years. They also are fantastic members of the Discord community and our Facebook private members-only group, and they have access to, more importantly maybe than Nikki and me, they have access to each other. And that is an incredible gift that all of our patrons are giving to one another, their time and attention in the group, their support, their shoulders to lean on, and resources to share. So we hope you will consider sharing your resources with us and keep this community growing and thriving. Thanks to you, we are able to devote even more of our time and attention to the ADHD community. Patreon.com/the ADHD podcast to learn more. Thank you, everybody. All right, so we have this inspiration from a listener to start off our topic today.
Yes, this was sent to us via email. It was probably maybe a month ago.
Okay, all right. So it's pretty fresh.
It's pretty fresh.
Email. Yeah.
And as soon as I said, we're going to put this in the content calendar, they replied back and they were very excited about that. So hopefully they are listening.
All right.
So Casey Kasem, I know people may not know who that is, but they do now.
They do now. Although I will say in the chat room, we have a suggestion that it might be Mario Lopez.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a little more current. He's more in our age group, that's for sure.
All I know is AC Slater. Here we go.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Nikki. I'm an avid listener of your podcast. I received my diagnoses in early January. That has been a massive disruption. That this has been a massive disruption is an understatement. I'm 33 years old and on my way to my second engineering degree. I held out telling my parents about my diagnosis until 2 weeks ago. Telling your parents about it. Whose fault is it that they've been undetected or that it has been undetected for so long, and a life until now with massive roadblocks and difficulties in relationships, as well as education, and with massive regrets, thinking what an early diagnosis could have changed, puts a massive strain on the relationships with your parents and other family members like grandparents. Addressing how to handle this properly so that the relationship stays intact would, I guess, as well for a lot of others, because I've heard of many broken relationships after the diagnosis. I think this would be very helpful. What do you think? Is this something that you run into often when you are in your work coaching? Is this a sort of a perennial subject that comes up for you?
It's come up, but it's usually the other way around. I would say that most people are pretty supportive. So I think that it's more of an exception to have it be completely to the point where how do I keep this relationship intact, right? Which I think is positive. But with that being said, I still think it's really difficult at first. I mean, I don't know if it's really an easy road to necessarily take. There's a lot of push and pull, right? After being newly diagnosed. I think that the person that has the diagnosis is probably, what I see and hear, is relieved to understand, what's going on, that there was a reason for some of the behaviors and some of the challenges that they were facing. But there's also grief in that too. Now what? What does this mean for my future? Am I broken? What does this mean? And there's grief, I think, too, for people that did not know sooner, because if they had known sooner, could they have taken a different path or gotten help sooner? There's also that fear of stigma around ADHD in itself.
Yeah.
What does this mean what are people going to think about me?
Well, and that was certainly my experience, was that, and I think the conflict is that, at least for me, it's that my family loves me dearly and they want the best for me, and they wanted the best for me when I was a kid. And so it is a shock when you say, look, I've just received this diagnosis. It explains a lot for me, because their reaction, even if I put it in the most gentle way possible, their reaction is, oh my God, we didn't do enough. And
right.
That's really hard to navigate, because the enthusiasm that you as the recently diagnosed bring to the table, that you want to learn more and continue to grow this, is hard to accept by those who feel like they have failed you in some way. And that
right.
was certainly, there was a massive cycle of denial with my own parents, until I had to sort of build a case that this is who I am, and it's who I was then too. And we just didn't know enough. We just didn't know enough when I was a kid to be able to intervene then. And that's okay.
Well, and I think that first reaction from the parents, I think is definitely important to evaluate and understand, because my guess, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to say, I don't know. I mean, people can tell me if this is true or not. I'm just going from a point of being a parent myself. And if something like this was to happen, I would feel this guilt, just guilt on me that I didn't catch it sooner. How did I not catch it sooner? How did I not notice it? And so their reaction may not necessarily be that they don't agree. It could be just that they feel their guilt. And that's something they have to deal with and something they have to process on their own.
Right.
And detach that. But it's interesting when, in the email, he says, whose fault is it that it's been undetected, and that these things are happening? And something I want to address as a coach is, I don't think that that's a very healthy question to ask. Because how does this serve you by asking this question? What if you did? I mean, what does it matter if it was somebody's fault? And if it was their fault, how does this serve you going forward? Do you see what I mean? It's a very unhealthy way to look at it.
Yeah. I just wonder what it means in this case. Whose fault?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, we don't know.
That's what I mean. Like, how do you even define what fault is? Is it fault for not catching it? Is it fault for somehow creating an environment that fosters ADHD with some sort of intention? Like, it is
and
not,
if it's genetic, which a lot of research says it is, then
that there is some sort of component that it just feels insidious to the relationship. So you want to talk about keeping a relationship intact? I think you've got to take the fault out of it. You've got to take the shame out of it. You've got to just find some way to distill it down to just the truth and fact. What is it that is truth and fact of this? I have a diagnosis. It explains some past behavior to me, and I'd like to help you understand it, and I'd like you to help me as I move to this next chapter. That's all it is another chapter.
I think that's a really good point, is that, this is just truth and fact. And after that initial conversation, where do you go? Do the parents just don't believe you have it, or do they not believe in ADHD? These are two separate things, right?
That's a really good question. Yeah.
If they don't believe that you have it, then it could just be a matter of education, right? And educating them, like, okay, this is what the doctor has found. This is, the tests I took, this all makes sense to me, and being able to educate them and kind of let them see the journey you've taken to get to this point. If they don't believe in ADHD, I go back to Rick Green's advice. And he's done a couple of blog posts about it. And I think it's great. He says, when I come across somebody that doesn't believe in ADHD, I say, well, you know what? I used to think the same thing until I got my diagnosis and I learned more about it. And then I, saw that there was an actual reason why I did these things. Or, if you don't want to go into that detail, well, you know what? I used to think that too, but my mindset has definitely changed recently. You don't have to explain anything, but I think it's just kind of going back to that. I used to think that too until, And, you know, with parents, look at the diagnosis, review the paperwork with them, you know, so they can see how it came to this conclusion. But I mean, I think with anything, you can't convince somebody to believe in something they either don't or do, you know, either do believe or don't believe. So I don't want to put the pressure on the ADDer to feel like they have to convince their family that this is a real condition. That's where we need to protect the ADDer. You know what I mean? And really say, okay, at this point, what are you going to do going forward? Because you need to figure out what this means for you and how this is going to relate in your life, especially as an adult. Because even though as adults, we want our parents' support and acceptance, right? But if they really don't believe in something that we know is to be real, I mean, somehow you have to like come to terms with what is that going to look like. And I'm not saying to like abolish the relationship at all. I hope I'm not going down that road.
Right. But it's also like, I like the way you put it. Like you have to sort of protect the ADDer. And there is, again, from personal experience, not to saddle this as a global experience that everybody's had, but I know that there was some part of me as soon as, I had that initial conversation with my mom, it's been 20 years, where there was this foreboding sense of kind of doubt that, how could this have been? I surely would have noticed kind of feeling. My initial gut response was, your disbelief is causing me to bristle. Your disbelief is causing me to go into sales mode and go into like, I'm going to convince you now that this is all me and this is incredibly frustrating, that you're not more open to hearing this, and that we all have to be reprogrammed. And I would get increasingly sort of angry that there was a questioning of my new reality when it was such a warm place for me. And that was really hard to do, to get past, because you want to sort of proselytize the experience. Like, this has been transformative, and now it's my job to tell the world, look at what I just discovered about myself, and now it'll all be different. And that's not the case. The one thing that helps this is that if there are, as you say, like if there are folks who just don't believe you, there are people who do. There are people who will. There are communities of people who will support you, if it's our community or others that are out there who want you to feel empowered in this new experience and to want to help you move to that next, stage of learning. Now that you have words to define what it is, you don't have to rely on those who don't necessarily support the diagnosis the way you want them to, because there are people who will.
I think for somebody that's newly diagnosed and then they have some doubt in their family, gosh, that's going to just really put doubt in yourself, right? Of who you are. And it's such a disservice to the person. And that's why, again, I want to really protect the ADDer and say, this ADHD does not define you. You're not broken. You do not need to be fixed, and it's not your fault. These are the things that you need to remember. And then going forward, learn about your ADHD, learn about how it affects you. What areas do you see it coming in? Come to terms with it. Accepting it is a whole process in itself, right? Whether you're relieved or not, it's a whole process in itself to have to actually accept it. And then you begin to work with it and not against it. And I think that's, again, educating yourself. And then, like you said, Pete, you have to have that community. You have to get people around you. Find your tribe. You're not alone. That could be therapists, coaches, ADHD communities. They're all over. So just find them and connect, because then you'll start to feel, okay, this is more normal than I thought. I'm not by myself. I had somebody say, I was watching something and now I can't remember what the topic was. And it wasn't about the Me Too movement, but it was something about when they connected with somebody that was in the same situation. Oh, it was veterans. That's what it was. It was the veterans' families. So it was the caregivers that have to take care of the veterans after they come back and they're wounded or, that kind of thing. And they were saying that one of the biggest comforting or one of the most comforting pieces of being in this community of support was just hearing Me Too. And so that they could talk to another wife or a husband or a grandparent and they all understood what it was like to be now a caregiver. And so I think it's the same thing with ADHD, having that just somebody else to say, yeah, I get that. I totally understand that. There's so much power to that. And then I got to go back to circle back around to the beginning of our show when we were talking about Jane's mantra. There can be a lot of grief about what happened in the past, but we can't change it. It's not relevant anymore. And so think about those words until now and, really think about what that means for you, because now you have information that you didn't know or have before. And so your future can be different. It can look different. It can be on your terms. And, it's going to be different, and hopefully it'll be different in a good way. One thing that I want to say about the relationship, kind of keeping those relationships intact. Pete and I, we're not experts in that, right? We're not relationship counselors or anything of that sort. So what I would want to say to somebody that is struggling with this is definitely look for the right support. If you need to talk to a therapist, if you need to talk to a friend or somebody that really knows you and understands you, get that information and keep working at it. Keep working at it. Keep looking at how you can move forward. And, there's choices to be made about what that relationship looks like. So maybe you stay in the relationship, but you don't talk about ADHD, or maybe that's not okay with you because it is a part of you and you have to come up, with some kind of boundary. I don't know what that is. And,
right.
but my point is that I think it's worth always for us to look into it and see what we can do, especially because, these relationships are a big, huge, important parts of who we are in our lives. So.
It's good stuff. It always hits me right here when we have this conversation because, those relationships are some of the most important relationships that we have. And it's hard to have conversations that strain them in such a fundamental way. As my identity all my life is now being questioned and pivoted. So great stuff. Thank you, Nikki. And definitely thank you, everybody, to the community on Discord, our ADHD community, because we witness in that community how wonderful it is to see members helping other members who are newly diagnosed. So it's a great place to jump in and just post your origin story and share how you dealt with your own family adapting to this new world for you. So welcome to ADHD. Thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this very episode. We appreciate your time and your attention. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright. We'll catch you next week right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.